Welcome to the Gen Z Collective podcast, decoding the generation that moves at warp speed. In our first episode, CEO Nick Cowling, not Gen Z, chats with Chanel and George, our resident Gen Zers.
Hi, I'm Nick Cowling, the CEO of Citizen Relations.
Hi, I'm George Hobby, copywriter and Gen Zer.
Hi, I'm Chanel Herbert, and I am also a Gen Z at Citizen Relations.
As you know, we're here talking about our Gen Z collective. So the personas our intelligence team has put together, and I know you guys have spent some time taking a look through. I'd love to know, is there one persona that you felt sort of resonated the most for yourself?
I definitely identify as a value vigilante.
Practical and value-driven. They're your most loyal customers, but only if you can pass their tests.
Personally, I see myself as a risk junkie.
Adventurous and community-driven, they cherish authenticity above all. The realer, the better.
It's great. I love that we have two different ones. Tell me where you think some of the biggest sort of marketing faux pas have been from some of the brands that you've seen.
I don't like when brands put too much of an emphasis on influencer marketing, specifically when it's things like extravagant gifts that don't necessarily impact the consumer. It can kind of be a little off-putting.
For me, I think a lot of brands, they fall into this trap of trying to force a square peg into a round hole where they feel like every movement, moment, or trend is something to hop on. And I think, Gen Zs, they really appreciate authenticity. And I feel like if a brand is aware of their lane and knows when to stick into it, that's when they're, I think, respected by our generation. So for an example, I feel like, if you look online on social media, there'll be these trends of, whether it's an audio trend or a dance, and you'll have senior execs at an accounting firm doing the dance and, trying to relate it to their company, and it just comes off incredibly ingenuine.
Let's flip the switch. Let's go the other way. So what are some things that you've seen from some brands you think are actually resonating or doing really well with Gen Z?
I like brands that are inclusive and value diversity. So one example that I can think of with Savage X Fenty was their New York fashion show. So they had pregnant women, they had amputees, they had all different types of sizes. And I think when you see that, it feels real, it feels genuine, because their entire brand is I'm inclusive. So when you're seeing brands that are saying they stand for something and it doesn't fit into anything that they've done before, it just looks performative.
One that really comes to mind when I think of a brand that really resonates with the generation, there's this window cleaning company called Pink, and they're completely Gen Z run, and they've kind of nailed this short form content, creating this nostalgia pieces, and they've gone to a point where they are now selling out their own merch, and they're a window cleaning company. And I think it shows that it's not the category that is the problem, it's how you sell it. And I think something as mundane as window cleaning can now be seen as cool because of how you market it.
That's really interesting. I was just reading some new data from GWI this morning in regards to specifically the hashtag ad with influencers. And Gen Z overwhelmingly wanted to see that. In fact, in some cases, you could almost say it's what they were looking for. You could almost say they're looking for the sellout. So tell me you're sponsored, but then literally do a collab or something that's natural. Like, why would this brand collab with me? And that was resonating more than particularly the content where they may be trying to hide it or at least downplay it. Does that feel like something you've seen more often? Like, are you literally engaged when you know that it's a sponsored piece?
I think with any content you consume, you don't want to feel like you're being tricked.
I think there's a level of self-awareness that's appreciated. I think, we're very aware of when something is sponsored. By acknowledging that, I feel like there's a level of authenticity that comes from that person who is creating that sponsored content.
Let's talk about the form of content. So more specific, I think there's I'll call it a myth or stereotype that Gen Z's attention span can't handle long form content. But we've seen some data, particularly with some personas in particular, they're almost gravitating towards more long-term and less short form.
I think, there is a perception that, our attention spans are fried by short form content, but I don't think it's an attention span issue. I think it's a value perception issue, right? People are still, to this day, receiving and loving long form content. Just what that long form content is changing, right? You'll have people binge 8 hours of Netflix on the weekend. I personally like to watch hour-long niche video essays on YouTube. You even have like an extreme example. Twitch streamers will do day-long streams, and people are, informed and they're watching that whole time. So I think, it's not about the fact that it's long, it's about what is in that length of time that they want to actually see.
I agree. I still do watch long form content, more specifically if it's like entertainment, humorous type things that are kind of a little lighter to consume. And I've also been seeing a trend on TikTok where influencers are sharing story times, but instead of doing one long YouTube video or one long TikTok, they're cutting it up into parts. And now it's become a 45-part series of Who the Heck Did I Marry? I don't know if you saw that. At least for me, someone who has trouble focusing on something longer form, having those small bite-sized reels and then doing a series out of it makes it interesting, but it also gives you something to look forward to.
Okay, so Gen Z, another, let's call it stereotype or belief, is that they care more about sustainability than other generations in the past. What do you think, especially given the current economy, do you feel like there is a bit of a dichotomy there? Is sustainability and affordability possible together? Is it a desire, or is there a sacrifice being made?
Well, we all want to be more conscious, especially as like a value vigilante, self-identify. You want to support brands who are doing good, but at the same time, the reality is that things are getting more expensive just because at the end of the day, you need to do what you got to do. You have to eat, you have to save money. In this state right now, I think a lot of Gen Zs feel pressure of what their future is going to look like, just because, with how, like, am I going to get a home? When will I be able to move out? Things like that. And so while you want to support, you have to sometimes sacrifice to get there.
Yeah, I think affordability is kind of like a primary barrier. I think, Gen Zers will have less disposable income than other generations, and we're still living in the highest cost of living. And so I think for a lot of Gen Zers, especially with micro trends, for them to participate when they come and go so fast, it takes a bit of flexibility and affordability to be able to, be part of those movements. I also think as well, sustainability is something that's very important to them, but I think for a lot of people, buying a $10 dress from a fast fashion company, they feel like that isn't going to make a dent when you have these larger corporations that they believe are really the ones, destroying our planet. And I feel like they believe that their small movement isn't going to have a, large effect compared to these other businesses.
I also think that we have to pick and choose kind of what we want to spend our money on. So I think sometimes Gen Z, we crave travel, we crave different ways to connect. And so I think sometimes we might rather spend money on like something like travel or like an experience versus a sustainable brand. Yeah, it's like picking and choosing what's more important to you at the time.
In your opinion, what do you think is something that Gen Z is willing to sacrifice for some of the other decisions, outside of sustainability, but some other decisions that they may have to choose between?
I think traditional career routes is definitely one. I think there's less of this pressure to enter an industry, enter a company, and move your way up that ladder versus other sources of career or income. I think Gen Z are very adverse to authority, and I feel like they'd rather take flexibility over income in those kind of situations.
I agree with that. But I think also people are willing to sacrifice how they spend their money to feel part of a community. And the example that I have with that is the boo-boos or any type of mystery box type of thing. Like some people might not have cared. I didn't. I'm talking about myself here. I never really cared about Labubus and blind boxes. Part of it's because my sister got me into it, and that's how I got into it. But things that you never considered before, you're starting to see it online, and you're like, oh, well, like, let me see what that is. Let me try this out and see what the experience is and what the hype is. Am I now going to be like a part of this community and like this side of TikTok and things like that? Kind of like that FOMO feeling, I guess.
All right, so we've spoke a little bit about influencers earlier, and I have seen, you've likely seen as well, sort of a longer term, I call it trend, but this sense that actually there's more de-influencing happening online as well. Does that something that resonates with the generation? Do you connect with that?
100%. I feel like when a creator is able to say that they're not going to use a product or talk about the problems of that product. When they do come to a point of actually promoting something that they do like, there's a level of trust that's been built there. And I think doing influencing is, super powerful. It reminds me of last year or so, there's this charity called Dan LaRue in Montreal, and their mission is to stop youth homelessness. So they got creators to basically reroute any PR box they were sent to their offices so that they could help that youth community. And I think something as simple as, zero cost, but something as simple as, getting these big corporations to then send it to people who actually need them. Then when those creators start to use products themselves, there's a level of authenticity and trust they built because of that movement they've been a part of. But now when I see them create their own content, I feel far more willing to actually buy into their products.
I personally prefer and take more serious the recommendations of my friends or family versus if an influencer were to say, just because they know me, they know what I like, I'm going to trust that more. I'll give it a chance versus if an influencer does.
I have one more question on top of, and again, something I read about this morning. I think it's fair to say Gen Z as a generation is more apt to buy directly on social media channels, TikTok Shop or via an Instagram ad than others, but they also tend to be the most skeptical. How do you personally feel about either buying products via social media, and do you feel like that skepticism is warranted?
I do. I don't typically look at things and be like, I want to buy that. Like, I need a little bit more convincing, and I think that goes in hand with what I was saying about like the recommendations of my friends, word of mouth. It's social media. Like, you can post anything. Anybody can be posting that. You don't know who is really behind it. So it's like, well, why should I trust this product? Who's the person behind it? Are the reviews real? Is this a real video? Like, things like that. So I would much prefer seeing it on someone versus just blindly shopping somewhere.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like, for me personally, I would never buy anything through a social media store. For me, social media is about seeing the experiences and the content of other people. The last thing I want to do is intertwine my finances into that. And for me personally, if I do see something that interests me on social media, I'll then leave the app and search for it elsewhere to then see if I'll eventually buy it.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate the conversation. For those of you out there, if you want to know more about Gen Z and a number of things we were talking about today, go to our site and download the Gen Z Collective.